Thanks for tuning in to How She Built That. I'm Hazel Stark, your host, and today I am joined by Allie Andrews, the founder of OmBody Health. And I want to just jump right into it today and hear from you, Allie, to introduce yourself and the role that you have in your business.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks, Hazel. I am the founder of OmBody Health. I started my business in 2014, and currently I kind of wear many hats, but I am the program director, and also since the pandemic, I've taken on a little bit more of a kind of admin, just handling scheduling and communication and supporting our clients. And I'll talk more about what the day to day looks like. But I personally am a yoga teacher and I have a background in holistic health coaching and kind of transitioning now into sex and intimacy coach, which is a newer business for me. So I'm a little bit in transition. But yeah, that's my role, and kind of in a nutshell, that's who I am.
Great. Thank you so much, Allie. So you've mentioned that you're in a bit of a transition. So can you describe maybe the arc of your business, how you came up with the idea for it in the beginning and how that transitioned and what it looks like today?
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned, I'm a yoga teacher. I'm not currently teaching anymore. Again, part of the transition, but was doing that for the past 10, 12 years. And back in 2014, when I started my business, the initial idea came in just chatting with a friend late at night. We were hanging out, and I had moved from Colorado back to Maine, and I was like, what am I going to do? I don't really want to go just get a job. Like, I feel like I want to do something more meaningful that feels more aligned and with me and with where I'm at in my life. And he was like, "Oh, why don't you try teaching yoga for people on their lunch breaks? That's a growing industry, and workplace wellness and just the yoga industry in the West, and how it's grown and really blown up, and how much of an impact just the philosophy of yoga and the lifestyle of yoga had on me and my life and the practice of it." I thought, wow, that's a really great idea. So I just kind of launched into it from there. And then it grew and morphed and changed over the years. I went through the phase of saying yes to everything, and uh, went down different routes that I later regretted and later learned weren't right for me and what I had to offer. And we also started incorporating on-site chair massage as a request that some of our corporate clients would ask for. So I partnered with a woman early on who I'm still with today. And I also would do workshops for companies around work-life balance and health and wellness and stress relief. And in addition to teaching a lot of on-site yoga for companies. And that really grew until the pandemic. Right before the pandemic, I had finally gotten into the place where I could call myself like owner of my business, where I could take a month off and go travel, and had a team that could step in. And that was a really great feeling. But of course, then the pandemic hit, and everything leading up to that point was all on site with companies. So I never have had a storefront. We've always gone to businesses, and that worked really well. But obviously during COVID, we couldn't do that. So we transitioned to doing what we could virtually. And I started to take on a lot of the classes and things, anything that I could. So I really was able to scale back pretty effectively at that point, and kind of got back into that role of operator much more than I had been right before the pandemic hit. And that went on for about a year, but I had had an inkling, kind of an intuition and inner knowing that I was destined to step away from that at some point and to transition into the next step on my journey, which I was really called to work with people in the realm of intimacy and connection and just feeling more comfortable in their skin, but do it at a deeper level, and that I could in a workplace setting. So I am, have been pursuing that for the past year, and I'm really stepping more into that. And OmBody Health is, I call it my side hustle now, because it kind of has turned into that. We're only really doing on-site chair massage. That has picked back up in full force, and it's a great service. And I have a great team of contractors who delivers that service. And I'm really a support person for them at this point. And just wrapped up doing a mindfulness challenge for a company. It's actually funny because it came full circle. They were a company that I had been pursuing very early on in my business to get them as a client. And then just, early summer, they came back and they're like, oh, we want you to build this challenge for us. So it kind of came full circle, and it felt really good. And it was really wonderful. And I also realized, okay, that there's a limit to this, and how deep I can really go with people. So I'm ready to transition on from that, and step into what's next, which is exciting and scary and all the things.
Nice. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's always a really helpful story to hear where things can pick up and be really successful, but then the environment can change, your focus area can change. And while I think every transition is a hard one, even if it's a good transition at some level, they're sometimes just really important choices to make for your own well-being and for the well-being of the kinds of people that you're trying to serve. So I think your story really highlights that so far.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I often think about is that particularly in product industries, people are often, they'll make a product and then they go and test it out on people, like, do you like this ice cream, or does this tool work for you, or that kind of thing. But in service-based industries, the test phase is a little bit different. And so I'm curious what kind of testing that you did at the very beginning of your business, and if you want to talk about where you're currently at in your business, if there's any amount of testing going on there too, it would be great to hear about that.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. And actually I did test out the service. I offered free classes for a corporate client that was actually a friend and colleague of mine in the health coaching and nutrition space, worked there at the time. And so I had a shoe in, and I said, I want to just offer you 3 free classes for your employees and just see how people like it. And after that, they decided they wanted to start paying for classes. So that was how I got my first client. And I really, over the years, especially in those first 1 to 2 years, learned a lot about protocols and how those classes needed to be set up, times of day, styles, like what was going to support people most. And especially being in a workplace, it's much different than going into a yoga studio and taking a yoga class. You're with your colleagues, and there's a comfortability aspect that we really had to address with just the types of classes that we would lead, and making them as accessible to people and all different levels of people, from the person trying it for the first time and who's really nervous to the person that goes to a studio multiple times a week. So there was a lot of testing. Like, once I actually got my first few clients, that happened. And now I feel like it's kind of like clockwork with what we have going on with the massage service. I feel like we've kind of got it down to a science, and that's really where any business wants to get, because you can easily duplicate it, you can easily scale it, and but that testing phase is inevitable, because you really have to figure out what folks want and what's going to support them most, what they're going to buy into.
Nice. Thank you. That's helpful. Yeah, I think it's so important for people to recognize that even with services, there's this aspect of testing that might not be as intuitive as testing a product, but is just as important before you go all in.
Yeah, because I have my ideas of how I want it to look, but that's not necessarily what the market wants. And there's a balance to find, right? Like I said, I went through that phase of just being like, sure, I can do that. Sure, we can do that. And kind of scrambling to do it. But usually when I did that, and it wouldn't go as smoothly as I would have hoped. So there's a balance of just adapting fully to what the market wants. And I think for service, especially if you're the one offering it, you have to really stay true to yourself on some level as well.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's really good insight. So speaking of that, that testing phase, those initial phases, of course, you mentioned that you offered 3 free classes, which I know in the beginning of a business can be just a very generous offer to do that, especially like if it doesn't work out, right? So I'm curious how you funded your business at the very beginning. Were you doing a ton of unpaid work? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, lots of unpaid work. I have much better boundaries around that now. It took me a bit. But yeah, I just started with like $800 in my of upfront costs, which was really yoga equipment, whatever else I needed, software stuff that I needed. And I just self-funded, and I didn't have a storefront. I didn't have a lot of overhead. So it was a little bit easier, I think, than some businesses getting up and running where they really do need that initial like capital to really get going. I was lucky with my business model. I didn't have a ton of costs other than my time. So I also had a part-time job at a restaurant. I worked part-time for the first year that I was in business. And it was hard, especially balancing the dynamics of working in a restaurant late nights to working in a wellness space where like you're here to help people settle their nervous system and prioritize themselves and their health. So that dynamic was hard, but I did it, and wouldn't have done it any other way, because I would have been so stressed if I didn't have that income that I could rely on. And as a result, I never got to this space where I was like resentful for overworking or not getting compensated as much as I wanted, like needed to or deserved to, for the work that I was doing for OmBody Health. So, and even now that I'm starting up something new, like I said, I have my side hustle, which is now OmBody Health, which is the time that I'm putting into this new endeavor that I'm not getting paid for yet. So yeah, that was really important for me. And I never had any investors or anything. I haven't even like broached that process of what that would even look like. And uh, I'm sure that it's created some limitations for me and what I'm able to do, but it's also created like an autonomy and a spaciousness in how I run my business that I feel like I really need personally.
Yeah, those are all those kinds of what are the benefits, what are the drawbacks, those like classic pros cons of, perhaps you can never have the perfect blend, but the one that's good enough and right for you in the moment is the one to really listen to. So you mentioned that you have had a lot of contractors doing like chair massages right now, in particular over the years. So I'm curious, who was on your team in the very beginning? Those could be people who were paid or not paid. They could be like business advisors, any other mentors, family support. Like, what did that team look like at the start?
Yeah. So the first person was my mom, who is entrepreneur, business owner. My parents have always been self-employed growing up, so she's had many different hustles that she's done growing up, and different jobs that she's done, most of which were her own business. So she knew, she was the initial one that helped me to get up and running and like do the paperwork to incorporate my business. And like on the legal end, I never actually had to work with a lawyer in the very beginning to get started, because she was like, oh, I know exactly what to do. Here's how you get your EIN. Here's how everything she knew. So she did all that with me. And then I did tap into a lot of free resources like the Women's Business Center, and Sarah was a mentor to me early on. I did Focus Maine. So I feel like I had like a advisory team in there. I was actually in the first cohort, and they were I would run so many things by them. That was in the first year or two of my business, I think. And I had a score mentor for a little bit. I had my boyfriend at the time was like, help me with my website. So we just did that together. He was a major tech guy, and could do programming and everything. So he helped me with that. I actually hired an employee I think it was the second year. So that was a really interesting choice on my end. I think I had like this really big vision, and I was like, all right, we're going for it. We're doing it. And she and I shared a lot of the same skill set. So that was a big mistake on my end. Although it wasn't like it blew up in my face. We worked together for 4 or 5 years. And she was able to, teach a lot of classes, and she took on, primarily was like the lead teacher in terms of yoga fitness classes, which I could also do to a degree. So it was a little bit kind of pushed me off to be doing a lot of the back office stuff, which was okay in small amounts, but once it became too much, I found I got really drained from it. So that was one thing that I would probably do over if I could. I would have tried to hire someone with a different skill set than me. And let's see, I mentioned Mindy, who still works with me today. She's our lead massage therapist, and she, has a full-time job doing chair massage for our corporate clients. And so she's been amazing. She's been like my rock through all of this. We have a very close relationship, and so yeah, she's the one that's been with me longest. The same friend I mentioned who gave me the idea, he was working in sales, and he's like still working in sales and very, very skilled at it. So he was always my kind of accountability person that would put pressure on me to say, are you making your calls? And I did a lot of cold calling in those early days, and he would really hold me accountable and even sit down and do calls with me and get me meetings. And so I had a lot of people on my team.
Nice. Yeah, I think that really highlights how, almost the myth of the solopreneur that I think a lot of people talk about, of like those businesses that appear to be run entirely by one person. Like, even if they don't have a staff, there's some aspect of a team that surrounds them, whether it is that family support, or whatever it is. Like, there are people that surround us that, especially in an entrepreneurial journey, we have to lean on. It's really overwhelming to do it all by ourselves. And so I think you also highlighted the importance of being really thoughtful about the diversity of that team in terms of skill set. Like, hiring somebody who has the same skill set as you seems great. Like at the beginning, like, right, oh, this is what we do. Of course, we should all have these skills, but then recognizing, like, wait a second, is that what I want to be pushed away from? What's the work that doesn't fulfill me, that I could find a person who finds that work fulfilling. So I've seen some people who do the kind of service-based work that they really get a lot of passion out of and fulfillment out of, who also are managing their books and their social media, and then recognize, like, that doesn't fulfill me. Why don't I find someone who actually loves doing bookkeeping and actually loves managing my social media pages? And that way I don't have to do that anymore. I can lean into the things that feel good, and I have someone else who's doing the things that make them feel good. We're all happy at work, and the business is better for it.
Yeah.
So I think you highlighted that really, really beautifully, because
Yeah.
I think a lot of people hit that phase at some point of recognizing, where do I need to lean in and where do I need to step back?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I was doing a lot of teaching at the time. So I was feeling a little burnt out from that. So I was like, oh, great, I'll bring in another teacher. And the mistake was, I think, not bringing her on as a contractor and actually bringing her on as a W-2 employee, which just there was a lot more, I was a lot more indebted to her because of our relationship and because of what she signed up for that. Whereas if, she was just contracting for me, then it would have been a much different dynamic. So, so I learned that, and I probably won't make that mistake again. So sometimes we have to make the mistake for ourselves, because I'd heard that on podcasts and, like everything that I had read and listened to about business, but for some reason I still did it. So I don't know if it's just me, but sometimes I get into that mindset of like, oh, I'm the exception, or this is the exception to the rule. And no, it's a rule for a reason. So yeah, the way we build our teams is very, very important, and who we choose to be on our teams is very important.
Yeah. Yep. That's such a good point. What other work, if any, did you outsource at any phase along the way besides the actual provision of the services like chair massage and classes and things like that?
Yeah, I had a virtual assistant for a long time. And since my business has really scaled back a lot through the pandemic, I no longer do, and I no longer really needed her. But I had a couple different virtual assistants that would take on, scheduling, sign ups, mostly that, and emailing back and forth with our clients depending on what they needed, and helping to manage our team of contractors. So that was really, really helpful. Again, when I was kind of transitioning into owner, I was very hands off with the day to day, which was huge. And I definitely aspire to get back to that place with my new coaching business as it grows and evolves. And I also outsourced accounting and bookkeeping very early on, and will never look back and will never not outsource that to some degree. I do all my own invoicing and accounts, processing payments and paying out my contractors. I do have a payroll company as well, and I have someone who just reconciles my books, because that was something that I would always put off. I would always say I was going to do it, and then I would find some excuse to not do it. And so I just realized it's better to just have someone else take this on, and really kind of sit in as that like CFO person, who I'm clearly not. I'm the creator. I want to be teaching. I want to be, working with clients. I don't want to be, I don't have the skill set to be to be crunching numbers in that way. So that was one thing, another thing. And yeah, that was primarily it. Other than that, it was yeah, I think that was it.
Nice. Yeah, I think that exact example of getting an accountant and somebody to reconcile your books is such a common example for people in your position of running their own business and recognizing like, wow, this is not worth my time and it's not fun for me, over and over again. And I think people put it off for a really long time because it's like that point of like, at what point do I tip the scales where it's affordable to do that? And it feels like it's not, draining me. But the moment that you do it, it's like, oh, what a relief.
Oh my
I don't
God.
even have
And
to
it
think
just
about
makes
that anymore.
taxes so much easier too. Like, I have the same person do my books and my taxes, which is a no-brainer, but I know
Perfect.
a lot
Yeah.
of people who don't, and a lot
Hmm.
of business owners who don't. And I'm just like, you're crazy, because all year, every time she's reconciling my books, she's prepping. And so taxes are just super easy. When it
Hmm.
comes around, she's just like, ask me for a few things and I send it, and that's it.
Perfect. I know that's the taxes dream, right?
Yeah,
It's like
it's
quick
always
email
stressful.
and call it a day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, my last sort of nitty gritty question for you, and then I'll open it up to sort of any bigger world advice that you might have, is how have you marketed your business? Where did you find your customers? I know you mentioned like that one friend and that one company, and that allowed those three free classes to kind of get in there. But beyond that, have you used social media a lot, website, word of mouth, and how or has that changed over the life cycle?
Yeah, I think initially it was all just cold calling, because I didn't have a business. I didn't have a brand. Uh, so I would just pick up the phone. I would spend, an hour or so a day, most days of the week, making calls, and it was really uncomfortable. But once I got into a flow and a rhythm of and a habit of doing that, it really did pay off, because as a small business, I didn't need a ton of clients to have a profitable business, but I did need to have clients, of course. So I would just make calls and just call back. When's a good time to call back? When's a good time to call back? And keep on calling to anybody that seemed remotely interested, any companies. And I would talk to, of course, the HR department. And in my case, I would target, mid-sized companies, primarily mid-sized companies in Maine. And then I would also sponsor HR events and attend HR events. So that was another way that I think I just built some brand recognition and credibility, so that over time, people started to recognize my brand and our brand and who we were. And I have my website's been up and running. I had some pretty good SEO set up early on, so I still get leads through my website. And I never really got great at social media marketing. I did outsource social media at one point for a short time, but it wasn't a good investment, actually. I think I could have done really well on LinkedIn had I really pursued it. I never really got into LinkedIn. I've always had a lot of resistance going on LinkedIn and just social media in general. It's a love-hate relationship. But I think I struggled because my customer is a B2B business. And so that's where I think LinkedIn could have been really good. But yeah, so I struggled with, what kind of content to put out. Am I giving content for the individual who's having a really busy day and they're not taking any space for themselves to slow down and check in and take care of themselves? Or am I solely targeting the employer? And I think why I got into the work initially was to help these people who are like running around and so busy and had no space for themselves and their health to actually have time and space and awareness and prioritize that. So for me personally, yeah, I never got into a group of social media, but it was a lot of cold calling and a lot of just networking and sponsoring different HR organizations and events and all different types of main events and networking. I did a lot of Maine biz events. That's the great thing about Maine is it's small. So those events, you're always going to meet people that know people and can connect you.
Nice. Yeah. I think that really highlights that in the world of marketing, it's going to be different depending on your business. But again, diversifying your pathways is really important because you get a little from something and a lot from another. And so you just have to try on a bunch of different things, especially early on, and figure out what sticks and then lean into that and then shed the things that don't work. Like if Instagram really gets you a lot of customers, but Twitter doesn't, and you're not getting any sort of engagement there, like there's a point where you may just need to drop that. And I hear that a lot with LinkedIn. For some people, it works beautifully. There's a business that I knew of that was founded by people who met on LinkedIn. And then there's some people who like get nothing out of it. And so it's just a stressor. So it just depends on exactly your niche and what that looks like.
Yeah.
So to close out today, because you've had amazing contributions of an incredible story of the arc of your business and how it's shifted and what's been successful for you, I'm curious what kind of advice you might have to anyone along their entrepreneurial journey, whether they're right in the beginning, which I think is most of the people probably tuning into this as people right at the beginning of their journey, but also anyone further down the road who might be at a point of wondering, like, is this the point where I scale up or scale down or change? What kind of wisdom would you say directly to any of those kinds of folks?
Oh, yeah, that's a big question. But what's coming is just like know your worth. I think as an entrepreneur, especially if you're just starting out, it's really easy to underestimate or undermine your worth or the value of your time, and to have your work life, like those lines get really blurry, right? And you're working on the weekends, and before you know it, you're just like working 70 hours a week, or 60, 70 hours a week, and you're definitely not getting compensated for all that. So I think something again that I've learned over the years, and this might be inevitable a little bit in the beginning, but is to just keep track of your time, keep track of how much you're working, keep track of how much you're earning, and make sure that it's really worth it and you're really getting compensated, and that you're continuing to check in with yourself on how it all feels, right? Like, and you're continuing to take care of yourself through it. And I think like just trusting the journey that we're all on, which some people are meant to do one thing and stick with it and like stay with it for their whole life, right? And other people are meant to start 10 different businesses in their lifetime, or do a lot of different things at once. I don't just have one job. I'm a freelance writer. I have my side hustle, which was once my full-time job, and then I have a new endeavor. So don't be afraid to just honor yourself and what feels good for you. And again, just know your worth and set boundaries with your time, and make sure you're having time to do the things you love and the things that bring you joy and the things that make you happy. Because otherwise, it's just none of it's worth it.
Yeah, thank you. I think that advice also translates well to personal life and relationships too. Like check in with yourself. Is what you're putting in worth what you're getting out of it? And what are the boundaries that you need? And how does that fit in? And I think it's easy, especially for entrepreneurs, to get into the selfless mindset of like this is good work that I'm doing. It doesn't matter if it's wearing me down. And
Mm,
ultimately that compromises your goals in the end if you're wearing yourself down. So I love that advice about checking in with yourself regularly to just see how it all feels, to make sure you can make
mhm.
those adjustments to ensure that it is the fulfilling work you dreamed it to be. So
Yeah, right. And not being afraid to reroute if you need to. And that reroute might not happen for 2 more years down the road, but you can still start planning for it, or at least know like it's coming, and
mhm,
kind of start doing the legwork for it
mhm.
much in advance, if that's what feels right for you.
Nice. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Allie. I think this is going to be really helpful to a lot of people and just really interesting to other people who even aren't on the entrepreneurial journey that you've been on. So we really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and offer your amazing story to folks. And best of luck in your new endeavor.
Thank you so much. It's been really fun conversation.